Let's commence the first panel session. I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to ask Asier Aranbarri to please come up here. Asier, please. Yes, thank you. She's speaking in Basque now. In the Basque Country, public institutions, mainly Eusko Jaurlaritza, is working adhere to the local Global 2030 agenda, and you're promoting initiatives like the Euskadi Basque Country 2030 initiative. I would like you to share with us, Asier, the need and the opportunity of that approach that you're taking from the government to address the sustainable development goals and bring them to the Basque Country. Thank you very much, Idoia. Thank you very much. Good morning, First Minister. He's speaking in Basque now.
Hurbiltzea Euskadira, hurbiltzea bereziki herritarrei. Ze herritarrerik gabe ez dago 2030 agendarik. La Agenda 2030.
Agenda 2030 or the SDGs, well, we talk about 5 fields, people, prosperity, the planet, and peace. And the first field is essential, which are the partnerships. A 2030 agenda has to be transforming if it's capable of generating good partnerships at all different levels. And in that sense, when we're talking about bringing the SDGs to the Basque 2030 agenda, it's a way of achieving good international partnerships. And I think John and Fernandez, as well as the First Minister of Wales, have spoken about, and that's an essential issue, because one of the main reasons is that the local secretary of 2030 is located here, the headquarters here in the Basque Country, is that United Nations value, in a notorious way, shall we say, the governance systems that we have. A governance system tries to align the efforts, interinstitutional efforts, and also brings together civil or organized civil society vis-a-vis Agenda 2030, and it tries to put focus upon citizens as a whole, because, as I said before, there's no 2030 agenda without citizens that we all form part of truly feel involved. SDGs can't be developed or we can't work on that roadmap in the Agenda 2030 and meeting the goals if we don't really feel engaged in order to advance along those lines. Thank you very much, Asier. I'm going to give you the floor now to our speaker, international speaker, and I hope she's connected, or he's connected, sorry. David Clubb, Chair of the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales. He, unfortunately, is not going to be with us in person, but I believe he's somewhere behind the screen, or on the screen, let's hope. Yes, I think he's connecting at present from what I'm here. He's going to connect in a moment. Thank you very much, I said, for putting the focus upon the importance of partnerships and the collective responsibility that we have in order to share this. And I feel that Bilbao Metropolis 30, that links the private and public efforts, is similar to that effort that you're promoting. And we also have in common that long-term approach, which is, even though it's more urgent to respond to those challenges that we have on the table, it's a long-term approach or perspective. Would you like to add something? The prior meeting that we had with our friends from Wales, what drew my attention, we knew this, but we were able to talk about it today. They've passed the law or the act of future generations, and thanks to that act, they've got to measure the impact of everything they do looking towards the future, to measure the repercussion of the decisions they make for future generations. And I understand that this is a very interesting reference or benchmark for us, because those of us who are in politics, quite often we look on what's going on the next day exclusively, and it's fundamental to look to the mid and long term, because if we look to the mid and long term, we can think about the future generations in the 5 fields that I talked about before, in people, and that of prosperity, the planet, and peace. And that mid and long-term perspective allows us to get things right on the short term. So from the partnerships generated between the public and private side of things, and looking towards the international focus, looking for interesting partners that can help us to learn and to weave a joint work together and to look on the mid and long term, especially thinking about the future generations. I think that's a lesson which is very important, and we have still a long way to go there. Thank you very much, Asier. I think that Dr. Clubb. Good morning, David. Very well, thank you.
For taking part in this seminar. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Okay.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, the first question that I would like to ask you, David, has to do with the mission that the Commission has vis-à-vis achieving long-term objectives that will improve the life of Welsh citizens and supporting the Government of Wales. I would like you to initially share how you develop your mission. How do you approach that challenge? Did you hear me, David?
Way of introduction for me to start talking about my experiences with the Infrastructure Commission in Wales.
Oh.
And I would like to start with just a very brief story about my own experience with the Basque Country, where I had the pleasure of cycling the Camino de Santiago and went through the Basque Country and cycled with 5 young Basque men and had an amazing time. They were incredibly generous, very warm-hearted, and I've always carried that vision of the people from the Basque Country as being a very, very warm, embracing, and generous people. And that's why I'm really happy today to be able to contribute a very small amount back to this conference, because I will always share that memory with great pleasure. I'm going to share my presentation. Bear with me 1 second.
Yeah, perfect.
So I hope you can see that. I'm going to talk now about how infrastructure and society and concepts around frameworks are very important for us in Wales about infrastructure. So in particular, my interest is in how an infrastructure commission with a very small amount of resource can provide some quite interesting concepts to help people think and understand infrastructure in different ways. So the first slide here is a picture of 6 out of the 8 commissioners. And very simply, we exist to provide advice on the infrastructure that Wales needs. The Infrastructure Commission itself has been in existence for about 6 years. It started in 2018, and the remit was pretty clear. There was a very strong focus on the economy, and the time horizon for the discussions of that commission were 30 years into the future. We have a very different commission now, and the remit has been changed quite significantly. So the emphasis for us in this commission is on the socio and the environment. And also I requested that we change the time horizon out to 80 years in the future. So this socio-environment focus is driven by several things which are a key part of Welsh Government policy. Policies which I would add have been embraced by civil society. So the first one of those is the nature emergency, which was announced by the Senedd and agreed by Welsh Government. And the second is the climate emergency. So both of these are very strong drivers for what we do. And the time horizon of 80 years is really looking at something which is more realistic when we're talking about infrastructure than 30 years. And I think an 80-year time horizon is more reasonable when we are trying to imagine what the very long-term impacts of climate change will be. So 30 years doesn't really allow us to imagine some of the very severe impacts from sea level rise, drought, and other things. And 80 years, I think, allows us to plan a bit more effectively. So when we think about infrastructure, certainly through the Infrastructure Commission, we are really thinking from the perspective, we're trying to imagine the perspective of somebody being born in 2103. And that perspective is really interesting and important for us in our deliberations. So I believe that the perspective we hold should determine, or does determine, the response that we make. And I'm afraid to say that in general, the infrastructure sector, certainly historically, perhaps that's changing now, has been driven by a perspective of white men in general. And therefore, the response of infrastructure has been to provide services that are shaped through that vision. And we believe that that needs to change. So when we consider infrastructure, we need to imagine and we need to ask about the needs of people who are not able-bodied, the very young, the old in society, people who have different social views, whether that's because of religion or because they choose to live their lives in different ways. And each of these sectors, as Mark said earlier, is not somebody to be benign to, but they bring strengths and they bring perspectives to us which we can't otherwise imagine. And by trying to consider the needs of all different users in society, infrastructure will deliver better outcomes for everybody. By applying these thoughts about considering the needs of everybody, we know that we can better serve the needs of social justice. And we will also better serve the needs of intergenerational justice. And in general, when people discuss justice, they tend to focus on social justice because those inequalities are right in front of us. But we must also try to remind ourselves about intergenerational inequality, because that is something that is very real. It's just harder for us to imagine. So in all of our discussions, we keep saying 2100. What will those children think of the discussions that we have today? So how do we get from this white male perspective to a more interesting, rounded perspective? Well, we think that something about the team composition is quite important. So the makeup of our Infrastructure Commission is much more representative of the population of Wales than previous Infrastructure Commissions. And we're also quite interested in the role that behavioural science can play in telling us how people will choose to interact with their infrastructure. There's lots of help out there for people who are interested in cities, city planning, and how to incorporate aspects of supporting different user groups. We were interested to see that there's a Scottish city has planned to become the UK's first feminist city, improving lighting, walkability, and public services. There's also the International National Park City Foundation, which has a number of different aspiring cities and existing cities as part of its movement, and that aims to bring biodiversity into our cities and to bring the concept of a national park within urban environments. There are good practice guides out there on building age-ready cities, on making cities child-friendly, and on providing inclusive infrastructure. So these challenges, and they are significant challenges, particularly with the urban environment, there are resources to help us come to terms with some of the concepts that might be useful. So when we think about how an infrastructure is interacting with our partners, we need to use some frameworks to help us change our thinking, and how do we incorporate that into practical outputs. So we have a number of different frameworks through which we operate. We consider the nature emergency, the climate emergency. In Wales, we have an act called the Wellbeing of Future Generations. We think very long term, and we're aware of the socio-economic duty, which means that we want to see equality of outcome for all of the citizens of Wales. And we also are aware that there may be additional frameworks that could be helpful, so we keep that under review. If we deal with the nature emergency, the climate emergency, if we think long term and we think about the needs of the poorest in society, we will deliver that equality of outcome. And through the well-being of future generations, there is also another 7 aspects through which we can consider, and I won't go into each of these, but 2 parts of our framework help us to consider the outcomes of infrastructure which can deliver the sort of outcomes for the future that Wales wants and needs. So if we consider how cities can be built, taking on the needs of young people, of old people, and of inclusive infrastructure, we will comply with our need for the well-being of future generations and our socio-economic duty. If we build in plans to make cities more female-friendly, we can improve our delivery of those things. If we incorporate national park city ideas, we can support the nature emergency and the climate emergency. And there will be other frameworks which can help with this. We heard from the First Minister of Wales earlier, and I would say that we need radical policies because business as usual has been hopeless in delivering what we need in a climate-friendly and a nature-friendly way, and in a way that serves all of the population. And in a couple of years ago, there was a big debate in Wales about expanding the principal motorway, when the First Minister came in, he made the decision not to expand that motorway. And this was the first sign to me in 2 decades of devolution that Wales was doing something which was quite different to the rest of the UK, and in principle quite different, I think, to other places in Europe. That radicalism was continued with the recent publication of the Roads Review, where most of the roads that had been proposed, new roads, had been proposed in Wales, were analysed, and it was determined that many of them would not proceed, and the ones which were going to proceed would be changed. These sorts of radical thinking is absolutely necessary if we're going to build livable cities and if we're going to fulfil our obligations to future generations. So I'm going to talk very briefly about our aspirations internally for the Infrastructure Commission. We had the first 3 years of the Infrastructure Commission, and then the second 3 years, of which I was appointed in late 2021. We're doing work this year on renewable energy. Next year, we'll be working on trying to understand how we can reduce the impact of flooding in Wales. And in the final year, we are likely to look at some of the more existential risks from climate change, including sea level rise, and how we have that discussion with coastal communities about whether their communities will be viable in 80 years' time. And that's when the end of my term comes up. But I also wanted to talk about the values, because how we operate as a commission is determined by the values that we hold. And this is very much a work in progress. But one of the things that we're very keen on is transparency. How do we hold our discussions? Who are we talking to? And we have taken some interesting steps, I think, in trying to help people understand what we do on a daily basis. We have something called a digital garden, which is an online resource that you can go to and find out on any given day of the year who we have talked to and the sorts of discussions we're having. So if you click on the 8th of March for 2023, you can see that we attended a group meeting and we have published the interviews of that meeting. I believe that transparency is absolutely critical in good governance, and I'm determined to try and use this role to show what the art of the possible is in using free open source software and opening the doors of the Commission so that everybody is welcome to see what we're doing and everybody is welcome to contribute their ideas. There was some mention about partnerships, and of course we can't do this alone. We have talked to many people, and again the record of these meetings is all available on the website, and it's actually through the soft power of those partnerships that we're able to carry out so much activity. We can do very little with our own resource, so we're trying to leverage the skills of our many partners. And we're also very keen on using open source social media as a way to reduce the barriers for participation and public participation in discourse and conversation around infrastructure. We are also very interested in the concept of inner development goals. In other words, how we think. The claim has been made that the biggest problems in the world are not climate change and the nature emergency, but it's selfishness and greed and a lack of empathy and understanding. And so that's why we're really interested about how we think and how we interact internally and externally. So we're currently doing work on how we act within the Infrastructure Commission. So that's something about how we think and how we operate, and it is definitely a work in progress. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, David. Tu exposición me ha parecido un magnífico ejemplo de uno de los
Sorry. It was a good example. In your commission, although the subtitles mention infrastructures, a lot of your projects are based on values. We haven't got much time, so I'm just going to ask you for an impossible mission, which is to summarize in one word or just a short sentence so that we can finish at 9:45. So to summarize how we can make progress in our collective responsibility with the projects you are promoting. If you had to find a lever, a magical lever to help moving forward and promoting those projects towards the future, what would it be, in your opinion? If you'd like, Asier would start to give us that magic word, and then David, and then we're going to finish this. In particular, transformation for me, to believe that we can actually transform things and change things, and through the public and private partnerships to actually work on the values that are very clear and shared. And from that, with a governance that is well structured, be aware that we can do a transformation, we can make a difference. We just have to look at the 40 years of development and the development Bilbao transformation, Bilbao 30, and all these years. 40 years ago, Bilbao was a very different place than what it is today, and it's because people had the vision, they made the effort, and they worked together towards the same goal. And I would highlight that one of the levers of transformation would be to have that transformation nature, and if you want, you can. Thank you very much, Asier.
Your advice?
Would you mind just repeating the question?
Yeah, I was asking about a final sentence or just one word to help us move all these projects forward. What do you think is the magical recipe for that?
I will repeat my
Voy a repetir mi idea de que
and it's really interesting for me that when I think about discussions we've had and decisions that have been made, we would often have made different ones if we had had the people from 2100 sitting in the room with us and giving their opinion about the world that they inhabit. So the very long term is an incredibly valuable tool in decision making.
Okay, pues yo creo que misión cumplida con transformación y la.
Well, this is mission accomplished, and we would like to wrap up with this. We have a coffee break. We'll take a break and do networking, and if you would like, we'll come back at 1:45 to start on time. Thank you.